What would you do if the person who humiliates you on the street discovers that you are their boss? A dark night, an empty street, a policeman with power and prejudice. Aisha just wanted to get home, but she found herself at the center of a racist abuse. Beatings, humiliation, until he discovered who she really was. How will he react when he learns the truth? Can he escape the consequences? Find out in this gripping story. The night fell over the city like a heavy, damp shroud. In a neighborhood where the flickering streetlights bore silent witness to a routine shaped by inequality, Aisha walked home after her shift at the cafe. Her footsteps echoed on the sidewalk as she checked her phone, replying to a message from her mother, who, like every night, reminded her to be careful. Aisha was used to the murmurs, the lingering stares from certain customers who seemed uncomfortable with her presence, the way some pedestrians clutched their bags tighter when she walked past. But that night, something different hung in the air, a sense of imminent danger. She noticed it quickly. A few blocks from her home, a patrol car crept along beside her. Aisha felt the weight of the gaze scanning her through the window. She forced herself not to look, to keep walking with her head held high, even as her heartbeat quickened. "Hey you!" a commanding voice barked. Aisha froze. Slowly, she turned and saw the officer stepping out of the car. He was a stocky man, his uniform stretched over a prominent belly, his face permanently etched with disdain. "Can I help you, officer?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. The policeman regarded her with cold eyes. "What are you doing around here at this hour?" "I'm going home. I live 2 blocks away." The officer clicked his tongue. "You look like trouble. Show me your ID." Aisha felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She knew how these things worked. If she refused, he'd take it as defiance. If she complied, he might still find an excuse to harass her. But she had no choice. Slowly, she pulled out her wallet and showed him her ID. The officer barely glanced at it. "And how do I know you didn't steal it?" The mocking tone, the veiled accusation, sent a chill through her. "Because it's mine," she answered firmly. The officer stepped closer, invading her space. "Getting smart with me? Huh, black girl?" The word hit her like a punch to the chest. Aisha swallowed hard, feeling anger bubbling inside her, but she forced herself to stay composed. "I just want to go home," she said, taking a step back. But the officer had no intention of letting her go so easily. "Turn around and put your hands against the wall." "What? I haven't done anything." "Are you challenging me?" he growled, his hand moving to the baton on his belt. Aisha knew in that moment that any wrong word could seal her fate. Before she could react, the officer shoved her hard against a building wall. A choked gasp escaped her lips. "Hand behind your head," he barked. Aisha tried to resist, but the blow landed before she could do anything. She felt the baton strike her side, sending pain shooting through her body. The night was dark, and the streets were empty. But somewhere, someone was watching. Who was there? Would anyone intervene? Or would this just be another story silenced by fear? Aisha felt the sting of the blow radiating through her. She staggered, one hand pressing against the wall to keep from falling. Her breathing was ragged, her mind torn between fear and defiance. The officer sneered. To him, she was just another black woman on the street, someone he could humiliate without consequence. "Are you going to cooperate now?" he taunted with a twisted grin. Aisha closed her eyes for a second, trying to steady her trembling legs. She took a deep breath. She wouldn't cry. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. "I haven't done anything wrong," she repeated, her voice stronger this time. "That's for me to decide," he said, yanking her arm roughly. But before he could do anything else, a voice interrupted. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" A deep male voice rang out from across the street. A middle-aged man in an expensive suit strode toward them, his expression furious. The officer scowled but didn't let go of Aisha. "This is none of your business, sir. I'm doing my job." The man stopped in front of them, his gaze locking onto Aisha, who was still clutching her bruised side. "Good God. Are you all right, Miss Hassan?" The officer blinked. "What did you just say?" The man looked at him in disbelief. "Do you have any idea who you're arresting?" "This is Aisha Hassan, the newly appointed director of the city's Equal Rights Commission." The officer felt the ground vanish beneath his feet. Aisha Hassan. The name sounded familiar, but he had never bothered to pay attention to the department's diversity and inclusion reports. His face paled as he stared at the woman he still held. Wait, she's? Aisha lifted her head and met his eyes. She was no longer the frightened woman he had tried to intimidate in the dark street. She was someone with power, someone who could destroy him with a single phone call. The man in the suit turned to her, concern in his voice. Miss Hassan, would you like me to call your lawyer? Sweat beaded on the officer's forehead. Oh, listen, this is just a misunderstanding. Aisha studied him for a long moment. Then, her voice steady and cold, she said, No, it's not a misunderstanding. It's exactly what I think it is. The officer felt a chill creep up his spine. What would Aisha do now? Report him? Or make him face his own racism in an even more devastating way? The officer felt ice in his veins. His authority, his false sense of control, everything was crumbling. Aisha kept staring at him, unblinking. She was no longer the woman he had tried to subdue. She was his boss. Let go of my arm, Aisha commanded, her voice like steel. The officer obeyed instantly, stepping back. The arrogance had drained from his face, replaced by the fear of a man who realized his career was on the line. And Miss Hassan, I didn't know who you were. Aisha tilted her head, feigning curiosity. Oh, and if it had been another black woman, one without a title, without power, would you have beaten her too? The officer opened his mouth, but found no words. The man in the suit pulled out his phone. I'm reporting this right now. The officer raised his hands in desperation. No, please. It was a mistake, a misunderstanding. Aisha took a deep breath. She knew she had the power to ruin him in an instant. One report from her, and he'd lose his badge. But punishing one man wouldn't change the rotten system that gave him a license to act this way. Give your badge, she said calmly. The officer hesitated, then swallowed hard and handed it over. Aisha took the cold metal, glanced at it briefly, then slipped it into her bag. Tomorrow morning, I expect you in my office. We're going to talk about what justice really means. The officer nodded quickly. Why, yes, ma'am. And if you decide not to show up, she added with a frosty smile. Trust me, the entire city will know what you did tonight. The officer nodded frantically, as if his life depended on it. Aisha said nothing more. She turned and walked away. Her body still ached, but her spirit remained unbroken. She knew this was just one battle in a much larger war. But tonight, at least she had won. The next day, a report arrived at her office. The officer had resigned before their meeting. He had tried to save himself, but Aisha made sure his record bore the stain of his abuse of power. He was just one man, but the real fight was far from over.